So I'm going to be talking tonight about funding for graduate school. This is everybody's favorite topic, right? Money. How do we get money? How do we make it through this graduate school experience with having some financial support as we kind of go through that? And so I'm going to be talking tonight about who gets funded, kind of how that funding process works, and different types of funding. And I'm going to wrap up with some tips for funding and then also evaluating funding offers, because those are some important things too. My email address is on the screen here. If you have follow-up questions after this presentation, you are welcome to send me an email. Yeah, and a question of if the presentation will be available after the meeting, it will. I am actually recording the presentation and that recording will be shared out. It'll take a few days. We'll probably get it posted up to like a private YouTube or something like that. And I'll send the link out to everybody who registered for this. So you'll have that copy as well. All right, let's jump into it. So I am currently located at Purdue University. Those of you who aren't familiar with where we are, you kind of see it on the map here. We're located in West Lafayette, Indiana, kind of in the central part of the United States. And to kind of look at the next slide here, this will give you just kind of a quick picture of what the engineering portion of our campus looks like. So Purdue is a fairly large university. We have about 50,000 total students and about 12,000 total grad students. Of those, the majority are in the College of Engineering. And so here we have about 5,100 engineering graduate students. And the picture that's on the screen right now is showing kind of what I call the engineering quadrant. The campus is arranged somewhat by disciplines. And so a lot of the buildings shown in that upper picture are of engineering buildings. And then the bottom picture is Discovery Park, which is one of our interdisciplinary research hubs on campus. And a lot of our engineering graduate students work in that area as well. And that's where our Burke Nanotechnology Center is, which has one of the finest ultra clean rooms to be able to handle nanotech. And there's a lot of semiconductor things going on right now over there, energy, environment, a lot of great initiatives coming up. And so the one message as we transition into thinking about funding here that I want you to take away, if nothing else, is the idea that there is funding available for graduate school. And so if you're someone who's currently an undergrad and maybe you've taken out loans, you're paying your way through undergrad, recognize that graduate school can be different. There are different funding mechanisms available to graduate students. And here at Purdue, about 70% of our full-time grad students receive funding. So big question is, who is it that gets this money, right? That's an important question to know. And so the graph here kind of shows you the priority of which types of graduate students are the most likely to get funding. And at the top of that inverted pyramid are PhD students. And so PhD students are going to be the first who get funded. Close to 100% of our engineering grad students that are pursuing a PhD are going to receive funding for their studies here. And the options of funding that are open to them are larger than what some of the other types of degree-seeking students have. And I'll go over some of these different definitions and abbreviations that you see on the screen here in a couple of slides. But for now, I just want you to get a sense of the number of options that these students have. So for PhD students, they can be eligible for fellowships, for RAs, TAs, GAs. Again, I'll go over what those mean in a minute. As we kind of move down the pyramid, and then we have thesis master's students. And these are students who are still doing research. They're working on a thesis, they're working on a research project as part of their master's degree, but it's a shorter degree than the PhD. And so, all right, sorry about that. I lost my screen here for a second. They also will have the same types of funding opportunities available to them. They will just be a little bit less in number. So they also are eligible for fellowships, RAs, TAs, and GAs. It changes a lot when you move down into the non-thesis masters. And so these are master's level students who are not doing research as part of their degree. They're taking courses only, they're working on projects, but they're not doing research. And so that RA, that research assistantship, has dropped off as an option. There are also not fellowships available to these types of students. And so the types of funding available to them becomes much more limited. They can sometimes still do a TA or a GA, but at this point, a lot of them are either employer funded or they're self-funded. So they're paying their way through grad school. And then as we get down to the last category here, the professional master's category. Often these are accelerated degrees. Some of them can be completed in 12 to 18 months. Others are still 2-year degrees, but they incorporate what we call professional skill sets. Often they'll combine, for example, like MBA courses along with engineering courses, and they're designed for students that are on a particular career track and going into those types of industries to be able to prepare them for that. And so these types of master's programs are not eligible for funding from the university. And so if you are interested in a professional master's, just be aware that this is something that you're going to have to pay for yourself, or you're going to have to be working for an employer who's willing to pay, or partially pay at least, for your graduate education there as well. And the reason for that is the very specific nature of these types of programs, the type of experiences you have as part of it. And the idea is that it's worth your effort and money to be able to pay for that short period of time and then launch a career from there. So just know, as you're looking at their different graduate study options, what type of degree you're thinking about and what the funding implications of that are. So as we talk about the funding process, most of the opportunities that you have, you will automatically be considered for when you apply to graduate school. So your application that you use when you apply to graduate school is the same application that they use for admission, is the same application that they use to determine funding. All right. And so as we think about another pyramid, if you think about the way this process works, the admission committees will identify all of the students who they are going to admit. And then out of that pool, the very top students are those who are going to be offered fellowships. The next pool down, which is going to be the largest percentage, are those who are going to be offered assistantships. And then there's going to be, once the money runs out, there's going to be this pool of kind of unfunded students that you're still admitted, but you're not funded as part of your graduate school experience. And just to reiterate, the PhD students will be funded first. So kind of within each of these categories, the majority of those fellowships are going to go to PhD. The majority of those assistantships are going to go to PhD, but then there will be some fellowships and some assistantships that go to master's students as well. So for the funding process, something to be aware of is that you can also apply directly for external fellowships. And we're going to talk about what that means and some opportunities for you there in a couple of slides here. Another thing to be aware of is that once you have become a graduate student, there are also other opportunities that you may not see as an incoming student. So when you're applying for admission to graduate school, you're going to be considered for a lot of the standard types of funding opportunities that your department has to offer you. But there are also opportunities once you're on campus to receive other types of funding. So for example, in our office, we have a graduate assistant that helps maintain our database. And this is a position that is not necessarily open to students before they are admitted, right? We can't identify students, we can't interview students until they're actually here on campus. And so there are these types of opportunities once you are on campus that you can keep an eye out and continue to look for funding. And so when you first come to graduate school, whatever your initial funding offer is, does not necessarily have to be your last funding offer. There are other opportunities as you work through your graduate program that you're going to encounter and have other opportunities to be able to apply for and seek out new types of funding as well. All right, I promised I would define some of these abbreviations, so let's jump into that. What are some of these types of graduate assistantships? And there's really 3 main types. The most common are the first 2 here, and that's a research assistantship, and that's where you're doing research. So you are helping a professor working part-time in that professor's lab, helping them to do research. Second type is a teaching assistantship, and that is where you are teaching, as the name implies there. So you're helping a professor in the class, and this could be assisting with lectures. You may be leading a particular lab section. You may be responsible for hosting office hours, for helping students with homework, anything in terms of developing exams, helping to grade exams, but basically just helping with that whole teaching load that professors have. Many of you, if you're here at Purdue or if you're at a larger university, you probably have TAs in your classes, right? And so you're probably kind of familiar with what they do. And then the third type is this administrative professional, and that's abbreviated sometimes either AP or GA, just kind of a general graduate assistant. And this is the type that you will find in offices like mine, where there are administrative functions of the university that need some additional help. And we hire individuals to come in and help us. So in my case, it is helping to maintain a database. We have another grad assistant who helps with data reporting, another grad assistant who helps with some of our programmatic and event management. And so a variety of different types of administrative functions around the university that require graduate assistants to help us maintain these things. And those types of positions are the ones that you're less likely to know about before you arrive, but once you're on campus, you'll start to see job postings and opportunities for them as well. So why get a graduate assistantship? Why is this a good thing to have? So graduate assistantships are considered part-time employment. And so you'll be working what we call either half-time, which is 20 hours per week, or quarter time, which is 10 hours per week. And because you're considered an employee of the university, then you also will receive the employee benefits that kind of come along with that. Some of the benefits that you receive as a GA is you'll receive free tuition, so you won't pay any tuition while you're on an assistantship. You'll also receive a paycheck to help with your living expenses. And then there's other benefits along with that too. So these could be paid vacation, sick leave. Sometimes they'll have spousal tuition discounts if you have a spouse that may be coming with you and may want to take some classes here at Purdue. So just a variety of benefits that can come with those assistantships. As I mentioned before, these are typically considered as part of admission, but there are some that have a separate application. And some of the places where we see this especially are with teaching assistantships. And so some departments will have an application to be able to apply for a teaching assistantship. This is especially true in some of our general core classes. And so, for example, our mathematics department hires a lot of TAs to teach a lot of the foundational mathematics courses here at Purdue. And they have so many courses and so many TA needs that they hire students from outside the mathematics department. And so we have a lot of engineering students who will apply for those TAs over in the mathematics department. Another example, in our foreign languages and literature department, they hire a lot of graduate assistants from all over the university that are from particular countries and that speak particular languages to help teach in those courses. And those types of TA positions, there'll be an application for that you apply for. These types of assistantships can be awarded for a full year, an academic year, or either just a semester or a quarter. So typically a research assistantship is going to be for a full year, whereas a teaching assistantship is often either an academic year or it may just be for a semester at a time. And I see a question in the chat, would a graduate teaching assistant get the same benefits of a GA? And the answer is yes. So the benefits for all assistantships are the same, depending on kind of the employment type. So if we kind of look up here, this half-time, if you're working 20 hours a week, whether that's a research assistantship, a teaching assistantship, or a general graduate administrative professional assistantship, then you're going to receive the same types of benefits. If you're working a quarter time, so 10 hours per week, whether that's a research, a teaching, or a GA, you're going to receive the same type of benefits. So the type of benefits you get is tied more to the level of employment, whether it's half-time or quarter time, and less to which type of assistantship, research, teaching, or administrative professional. And these benefits do apply to all types of assistantships. So all three of those types, these benefits apply to all of them. So one tip here, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here on research assistantships, which helps explain why this is. But one tip is to contact faculty who are doing research in your area of interest. And the reason for that, we'll kind of talk through as we think about the research assistantship process. So the way this process works is faculty members will submit grant proposals to receive research funds. And so these could be from government agencies, corporations, nonprofits. They send out a call for proposals. So they have some issue that they are looking for professors to help them do research on. Faculty member submits a grant proposal and says, I have expertise in this area. This is how I would approach this research question. I would like to be the one to help you solve this or look into this further. And then if the government agency, corporation, organization likes what they see in that grant proposal, then they send the money to the faculty member and say, okay, go ahead, conduct this research, help us solve this problem. Here's the money. You go out and do the research now. And then in return, the faculty member will hire you into their research lab to help them conduct the research, right? And so that's where that research assistantship money comes from. And that's why, if you think about this from a faculty member perspective, they are the employer. They're the one doing the hiring of these students. This is why they look first for PhD students, because a PhD student is going to be with them a little bit longer. PhDs typically last about 5-6 years, depending on if you already have a master's when you come in. And they also usually will have a slightly higher skill set, especially if they've already done a master's degree, they've got more research experience behind them. And so in general, right, these are generalities that I'm making, but in general, a faculty member is going to be much more excited to hire a PhD student who's going to be with them for several years to be able to help them work on this research project. And so the majority of that money is going to go to PhD students. And then if you think about kind of that inverted pyramid, the next type of student that a faculty member would be interested in hiring is a research master's student. So a master's level student who's interested in doing research. Because again, that type of student is going to most likely have a little bit more similar skill set and interest in doing the research that faculty member is going to want to hire onto their lab group, onto their team to be able to help them with this. It's not unheard of for like a non-thesis master's student to get hired on to a lab team or a project for some reason. They may have a special skill set, maybe a particular type of thing. But in general, if you kind of understand this process, you can understand from a professor's perspective the types of students that they are generally looking for as they go through this process. All right, let me take a quick look at the couple of the questions here before I shift over to fellowships. So question on contributing to grad research as an undergrad. And so this is definitely something that I encourage anyone to do, especially those of you that may still have a year or more before you graduate or applying to grad school, is to look for those research opportunities as an undergraduate student. Because the more experience you have, the more competitive you are going to be when you apply to grad school and when you are looking to be hired in to these types of labs. When you think about applying to grad school, both the admission process as well as the funding process, it really is more of like an employer-employee relationship than it is strictly an academic relationship the way you have as an undergrad, right? You have individual faculty members, especially at the PhD level, but also at kind of that master's thesis level, any of those research-based degrees, you have faculty members who are really your mentors and your supervisors in kind of this research space, and they are looking to hire you onto their lab group and onto their teams. And then are administrative assistantships common in other universities outside of Purdue? Yes, they are. So any university, especially the larger ones, are going to have these because they have different functions around the university that need to be maintained. The numbers are going to vary. They are not as common as TAs or RAs. And so it's not surprising if you haven't heard of kind of these administrative professional type assistantships, but they certainly do exist. Another area that you'll sometimes see these types of administrative professional assistantships, so in like central graduate schools, sometimes they have them, libraries, any offices that do like undergraduate research and they need graduate student mentors to help kind of manage the programmatic activities. So not the research piece, because those would most likely be RAs, but the programmatic activities that go into some of those things. So some of these different like offices and units that exist on a university campus, often they will hire graduate assistants into those types of positions. Yeah, okay, I'll take just a couple more questions here and then I'll move on because I want to make sure I stick on time. We'll save some of these questions for the end. But one question here that I do want to address is approaching faculty members. And it is okay to reach out to those professors if you identify somebody who's doing research in an area that's of interest to you. You can email them even before you've applied to grad school and let them know, I'm in the process of applying, I'm very interested in your research. Make sure you do your homework first. That's the most important thing. Make sure you have looked at the website, try to read some of their journal articles that have recently come out of their lab, get a sense of what research they're doing, and then be able to email them and let them know, hey, I read this recent paper, this is an area that's of interest to me. And you can ask them, is this an area you plan on continuing? Are you looking to add grad students to your lab, in the next year if you're getting ready to apply, or in a couple of years? You can also do this, those of you who still have a couple of years, you can do this for like summer research, undergraduate research, or academic year research if it's at your own institution. So any of you on here that are Purdue students, you can be reaching out to professors and ask them, are you looking to hire some undergrads to come in and work in your lab and get some of that experience? And then there's also summer research experiences that you can apply for. And those are open to students both within the institution as well as outside as well. My dog says hello, in case anybody's wondering. All right, I'm going to transition over to fellowships, talk about them a little bit, and then I will come back to more of these questions here. So as we talk about fellowships, these are very similar to undergraduate scholarships. So they're very prestigious. They carry a lot of, just prestige to them. They are good things to be able to put on your resume. So in addition to the financial benefit, they just help set you apart as a candidate for future aspects of your career. The eligibility, the benefits, the requirements can vary widely. And even the way people use the term fellowship can kind of vary in terms of how they talk about that. And I'll give you some examples here in a minute. So fellowships can be internal, which means that they are from within the university, or they can be external, which means they're external, they're outside the university. And the way you apply for them then is going to vary. So those that are internal to the university, you're again often considered as part of admission. Those that are external, so things that come from an outside organization, you need to apply for separately. So I talked about or mentioned, people use the term fellowship in different ways. So the term, when I talk about fellowships, I'm referring to what I call kind of a full fellowship. And that's going to typically include tuition, some kind of monthly stipend, which again is paycheck, health insurance, and may have some additional benefits in there as well. There's also what I would call partial fellowships, and they come in a lot of different formats. So things like travel grants, or that's the most common one. Sometimes there'll be, small research fellowships to provide funding just for certain aspects of your research, but they're not intended to fund your entire kind of degree or a big portion of your degree. And so that's just something to be aware of, that usually when I talk about kind of these smaller ones, I use the term grant. But different people use different terminology, and sometimes they'll talk about travel fellowships, but really that's just kind of a certain amount of money that's going to help you, for example, attend a conference, or a research fellowship that's going to help you fund like supplies for your research or something like that, as opposed to kind of a true full fellowship or graduate student fellowship that's really paying for your education as you come through. You generally cannot hold more than one fellowship at a time, but you may be able to use them in sequence. And so a good example of this is if you get both an internal and an external fellowship. Every year we have students that have this very fortunate situation where they are awarded a Purdue fellowship, and then they're also awarded some national fellowship. Maybe they get the NSF or the NDSEG or one of the NIH grad student fellowships. And so in those cases, you can usually put one of the fellowships on hold. So usually we put the Purdue fellowship on hold. The student uses the federal fellowship. Often those fellowships, the fellowships that you get can vary widely, but a lot of them are maybe 2, 3, 4 years long. And so if the student's coming for a PhD and the fellowship's only good for 2 years, they use that fellowship first, and then they use the Purdue fellowship after it. So it is never a bad thing if you are awarded more than one fellowship. It's never a bad thing to be applying to every fellowship that you can find that you're eligible for, because if you are in those types of situations where you are lucky enough to be awarded multiple fellowships, and like I said, you can't use them all at the same time. You can't, stack them up and be getting $100,000 in 1 year, but you can sequence them and use it to fund the entirety of your graduate studies. In general, most fellowships are going to be available in the fall. That's true for both internal and external fellowships. And so actually right now is the time to be looking at applying. Those of you who are seniors, now is the time to be looking and applying for a lot of those external fellowships. So things like NSF, NDSEG, NIH. And I'm going to give you some links to lists of fellowships that you can look at. A lot of those application deadlines are going to be coming up in kind of the October, a little bit November, but largely October. So they're coming up really fast time frame. You apply now for a fall 24 start. So there's kind of same thing as kind of the application to grad school process. There's kind of a year lag time. You apply now, that money comes to you next fall. So just kind of be aware of that timing, and there you do have to prepare and apply for these things ahead of time. And then kind of a last tip for kind of the internal fellowships, anytime you see anything that's optional on the application for admission, things like optional essays, I generally encourage you to fill out. Things like optional GRE scores, just make sure you understand how the particular program is using that, because sometimes programs will make things optional for admission, which means that they don't look at it or don't consider it in terms of deciding whether or not to admit you into the program, but they do use it to determine who gets funding. And so make sure anytime you see something optional on the application that you understand, is it optional only for funding, like only for admission and funding? Or if I don't do it, does that mean I'm not going to be considered for certain types of funding? So for external fellowships, I mentioned you apply for these fellowships directly. They come from a wide variety of organizations. They can be government, nonprofit, professional organizations, can be full or partial fellowships. Again, a lot of variation in the types of opportunities. One thing to be aware of when you're looking at external fellowships, especially those that may be coming from corporations or anything like that, is any work or other requirements that they may have. So sometimes, so here's one good example, GEM Fellowship. I'm gonna give you a link to that here in a little bit. That is a fellowship that we have here in the US for certain populations of students that involves an industry partnership and an industry internship. And so if you take that fellowship, you're agreeing that you're also going to go and work for that company for a summer internship as part of that fellowship package, right? So you just need to be aware of what are all of the expectations of a particular fellowship before you agree to take it. And I kind of already mentioned this, but give yourself that 1 year lead time. You need to be applying for fellowships now if you're applying to grad school for fall 24. All right, some tips for finding funding. So first of all, understand your program's funding process, right? You know, in general, like I said, your application for admission is also going to be your application for funding. You apply to grad school, you know, nothing else as kind of a baseline is needed. But different programs kind of have different processes. Some of them really expect you to be very actively reaching out to faculty and trying to find RAs. Some of them may have a separate application for TA appointments. And so make sure you're reading websites and looking up what is the funding process for that school. If you're not finding it clearly on the websites, reach out to either some grad students in the department and ask them, you know, what's it like getting funding in the department? What tips and insider information do you have? Or reach out to the graduate administrators, graduate contacts, whoever is listed on the website as the person you contact at the graduate level. And then consider what makes sense for your situation, right? You know, I back up to that inverted pyramid. You know, there are times that it makes sense to be applying for professional masters or non-thesis masters because that aligns with your career objectives and what you're doing. And you just have to be aware in those situations that there's not going to be a lot of funding from the university, and you have to find other sources of funding for that. There's other times where you really want like a research-based degree or a PhD. And so if that's your passion and that's your direction, then you have a different kind of bucket of options for you. So just make sure you understand what it is you really want, and then understand along that path what your options are. Google options, you know, review our list that I'm going to share here in a little bit, and just be aware of what types of funding opportunities you have. We talked about this a little bit, but when you reach out to faculty, you know, keep those emails short, professional, very research focused. Like I said, read one of their journal articles, talk about your research interests that align with them, attach a copy of your resume. And when I say keep the email short, I'm talking like 2 short paragraphs, right? Introduce yourself, just, that you're applying or that you have already applied, depending on where you are in the process, that you've interested in the research, have read a recent article, would love to have a chance to talk more, or interested to learn if they're going to be hiring any grad students in the upcoming year. And don't be kind of put off if faculty members are not able to respond to you right away. Professors receive literally hundreds, sometimes thousands of these emails over the course of an admission cycle. And they're very busy. They're doing research, they're teaching, they have a lab group that they're managing. They often are not able to respond to every email that they receive, but it's always amazing to me how much they remember. And it's never a bad thing when down the road they see your application come across their desk and they recognize your name because, oh, I remember this student reached out to me and I never had a chance to get back to them. Right. So it's never a bad thing to reach out to a faculty member as long as you're professional and respectful. Typically with kind of these emails protocol, what I recommend, depending on where you are in the process, you kind of send one email introducing yourself. If you don't hear anything back in 2 to 3 weeks, it's okay to send one more follow-up email. And then after that, I would wait. And then if you are starting to email kind of before you've received admission decisions or anything like that, you could do one more after you've been admitted if you're still trying to identify professors to work with at that point. When you apply, make sure you mention specific faculty of interest in your application. There is a place on the application where you can list, I believe it's up to 5 faculty. And so make sure you list them there. And that's partially because when these applications come in, and this is where I'll do a little plug. If you're not aware, tomorrow night, there is a webinar happening on tips for your graduate school application. We'll go into a lot more details about the application and how to put together a real strong application. But on that application, you have a place where you can list faculty members, and these applications are reviewed by the professors in the department that you're applying to. Right? It's not a staff member that's reviewing these. It's not an admissions counselor. It is an individual faculty member. And so when you list those faculty of interest, that basically moves your application to that professor's desk, right? And so then that professor is like, oh, this student mentioned me in their application. I'm going to take a closer look at this and see if they're a fit for my lab. And so make sure you've done your homework. You identify who it is that you may be interested in working with, and you list those faculty there. That's especially true for those research-based degrees, the thesis masters and the PhD. All right, some different fellowship opportunities just kind of get you familiar with some of the ones that we have here at Purdue and kind of how they work. So here at Purdue, we've got kind of 3 main ones that kind of happen behind the scenes. So the Ross Andrews and the Lynn, you may or may not kind of hear about these ahead of time, but these are fellowships that are available where faculty nominate you. So this is, again, that process where you apply to Purdue. Professors are reviewing those applications. They identify these are the students we want to admit. And then out of that pool, these are the ones we want to offer fellowships to. There's no separate application. When you apply, you are in that pool to be considered for those fellowships. Another fellowship that I want to call your attention to that's different is the Chappell Fellowship. And this is for any of the Purdue students on the webinar tonight. This is for Purdue students who are continuing their grad study here at Purdue. And so this is a very particular type of fellowship. It was an endowment that was put together by this Charles C. Chappell. And there is a separate application for this, right? And so I believe the deadline's usually in January. And so this is one to be aware of. If you're a Purdue undergrad applying for Purdue grad school, make sure you are applying for this fellowship. Absolutely. It's already kind of a limited pool because it's only open to Purdue undergrads. And so make sure you've got an application in that pool. There's a website there that you can check out with more information there as well. All right, some external fellowship opportunities, and I will share out these slides with everybody who registered as well so that you'll have access to these links as well. So just some fellowships to be aware of. The GEM Fellowship, one I already mentioned, that is a nice opportunity if you are an underrepresented minority here in the US. The NSF Fellowship is one of the most prestigious national awards. This is one's open only to US citizens and permanent residents, but definitely check it out. For any of our international students on the call tonight, Education USA If you're not familiar with that organization yet, make sure you check it out. Go to this educationusa.info. They have offices in countries all around the world, and they are there to help students from other countries come and study in the US. They have counselors at both the undergrad level and the grad level, and they have all kinds of great resources and information for how to apply, and then also different funding opportunities. So check that out for any of our international guests. And then we have an entire list. I think there's close to 100 fellowships out on our website. And so when you get a chance, check that out. Again, I'll send these slides out so you can have these links directly. And that list can be filtered and sorted by different criteria, areas of interest, citizenship, all those types of things. So you can identify fellowships that you can apply for. And it can be a little bit overwhelming when you start looking at all of the different application criteria and what you have to do. But what you want to think about is pick out just a couple fellowships that you want to apply for. For those of you who are US citizens, permanent residents on here, look for things like the NSF, NIH, if you're in any of the medical areas, NDSEG, if you're doing anything kind of related to national defense stuff. These are kind of good fellowships to set a foundation. Look at the application criteria for that. Once you've done kind of one application packet and you've gotten letters of recommendation and you've gotten your essays written, it's not that hard to then take that and tweak it for other fellowships. And so the hardest part is getting that first application together. But once you have that first application together, you can make adjustments where you need to make it eligible then to be able to apply to other fellowships as well. So definitely take advantage of that. We have students every year here at Purdue that receive all kinds of fellowships and awards, and it's definitely possible. You just have to actually make the effort to apply. All right, kind of last section here as we move through is tips for evaluating offers. And one of the biggest things I want to say, especially if this is not on your radar yet, is make sure you are paying attention to the cost of living at the institutions where you are thinking about going. Because you can have two funding offers from two different universities, and by the time you factor in the cost of living, it can make a big impact on how far that money is going to go. And that's one of our advantages here, located kind of in the Midwest at Purdue University, is we have a relatively low cost of living, especially compared to like the East Coast or the West Coast. And your salary here at Purdue will go much further than the same salary on the East or West Coast. So make sure you're factoring that in. This cost of living map is something that's out on our grad school website. If you Google Purdue cost of living map, it'll come up, but there's lots of other cost of living kind of calculators and things out there too. Just make sure that this is part of your consideration when you're evaluating funding offers, because you may get a dollar amount from one university that looks fantastic until you factor in the cost of living and how much it's going to cost you to rent a place, or how many roommates you're going to have in a one-bedroom apartment to try to be able to survive in that community. So just make sure you're factoring that in when you're evaluating offers. And then the other things to consider is to really make sure that you are understanding the whole package that you've been giving. And so that includes tuition and fee coverage. So how much of the tuition is covered and how much are student fees that you may still have to pay. And this is something to be aware of, just how different offer letters are structured as well. So there are some offer letters that will give you kind of a total dollar amount. We're going to give you X dollars. And then out of that, you have to pay the tuition, the fees, and living expenses and all of that. There are other funding offers that will say, we're going to give you this much salary, and then we're also going to cover your tuition, and we may cover fees, or you may have to pay fees. And so that's the other thing to be aware of when you're looking at your funding offer, to make sure you really understand what it is that it's telling you it's giving you, and make sure you're making an accurate comparison between them. Tuition and fees is just some language to be aware of. Sometimes those are rolled together in a university and they're covered or they're not, depending on the offer. Here at Purdue and at other universities, there's tuition and then there's student fees. And so most of our assistantship offers and our fellowship offers will cover tuition, and they'll sometimes cover part of the fees, but sometimes they don't. And here in the College of Engineering, fees can be about $1,000 a semester. And so that's something you have to be factoring in to that offer. Make sure you're kind of budgeting that and building that in. So you've got tuition and fee coverage, and then stipend or salary. How much money are you going to be getting? How is it paid? Is it paid biweekly? Is it paid monthly? Any Expenses, what are the expenses that you're going to have, the living expenses? How much is it going to cost to rent something? How about transportation? What does the general cost of food and living and all of those types of things cost in that area? And then make sure you're aware of any requirements of the offer. So I mentioned like fellowships may have work requirements for a particular area. Assistantship offers, there's going to be, these are, like I mentioned, employment, right? This assistantship. And so there's an expectation there. If you're expected to be a teaching assistant, what are those duties that you're expected to do? The research assistantship, what's the research? Who is it that you're going to be working with? Who's your supervisor? Sometimes these details aren't all included in a letter, right? And that's pretty standard too, especially things with teaching assistantships. They may not know yet what course you're going to teach, right? They may just be able to say, we've budgeted this money. We know we can offer you a teaching assistant. Your course assignment's going to come later. That's fairly common, right? So you may not be able to get all the details, but just make sure you do understand as much as they are able to include in that offer letter. And then the last thing I listed here is duration of the offer. This can vary widely, and there can be different criteria associated with them. Sometimes an offer is only a semester or a year with the expectation that it will continue. Sometimes an offer may be for like a PhD student. The initial offer may be 4 or 5 years long with the condition that you make adequate progress and that you're performing correctly with your work performance and things like that. So those are all factors to consider when you're looking at different offer letters. And then kind of as an aside, but it's really important, is to also consider your different professional development opportunities and your fit for the position, right? You may have a funding offer that financially is very strong, but if it's doing work in an area that does not interest you, or there's very limited professional development or growth opportunities, and you compare that to an offer that maybe the dollar amount is less, but there's really strong professional development, you're going to be able to grow your network, you're very excited about the work you're going to be able to do, it's a good fit, you like the people. Those types of things are really, really important. And so make sure you're factoring that in as you're looking at these offers as well. And then kind of my last tip here, it's okay to ask questions. If you receive an offer from a professor and you're not clear on something, you can email them. And you can also email the graduate administrator for your program and just clarify, what's included, what's not, or I'm not understanding a certain part of this letter. And it's perfectly acceptable to email them, make sure you understand what the offer is. And then my last point here, and this is very similar to the comment I just made, and that is that funding is really important, but it's not everything, right? You've got to make sure when you're looking at your graduate education that you're looking at what is it that you're going to be doing as a graduate student there, right? Are you going to be studying what you want to study? Are you going to have those professional development opportunities? How much are you going to be able to expand your network? Graduate school is so much more than just getting a degree and just figuring out how to pay for that degree as you go through. It's an experience, and you come out the other side of it in a kind of a different person, right? You think differently. You have a different way of looking at the world. There are doors that open up to you as a grad student that you don't even know the doors are there until you kind of start down this path and through these passageways and kind of see where it leads. And so make sure you are setting yourself up for success. It's very important that you're able to fund your way through grad school somehow, whether you're able to finance that yourself or whether you need to be looking for these types of funding opportunities. But when you're making kind of your final grad school decisions, make sure you're not only chasing a dollar symbol and that you're really looking at everything you're going to be able to get out of that grad school experience. So after today, here's some more kind of links and tips to kind of get you started. So if you head out to our website, there's a list of our different graduate programs and some of the different offerings that are out there. And again, it's okay to reach out to those programs that interest you. Start looking at those faculty, start identifying areas that are of interest to you. We're very proud that Purdue is, for the 3rd year in a row now, ranked #4 engineering grad program here in the US. And we are actually the largest engineering grad program anywhere in the kind of the top 10 ranked institutions. So we have a lot of really exciting stuff here. As you start exploring the website, looking at your opportunities, there's a lot of stuff there that you may be excited to explore.